Pamela remembered how, quote, in recent months, whenever he had left his huge pile of paperwork to go up to say goodnight to her, my father would find himself subject to a long stream of accusations that he didn't understand. He was ignoring her. His behavior had been rude. He didn't care about her. He was sympathetic and apologized even though he did not understand what he had done wrong. These were the exhausted outpourings of a woman who always drove herself too hard and felt intellectually isolated. To my father's great relief, after our short stay in the mountains, these sessions ceased. Now when my father went up, he would find her studying her pocket atlas, and she would simply smile and wish him a cheery "Good night, Dickie darling." And he would then return to his work through most of the night without a heavy heart. So basically, she's just, having some fits because there's nobody in her life who's going to pay her all this attention and make her feel like her life is worth something, because she doesn't have the ability to believe it herself. How many times have we seen this theme? People lashing out because they don't currently have somebody who is going to worship them and bow down to their intellect. So they lash out at everybody in their family. They're unkind to everybody. And then, as soon as they find that person who will be a sycophant, they're like, "I'm good. Good night, Dickie darling. Sleep well." Hello, how are you? Welcome to my channel. My name is Cheer Denise, and today we're going to continue on with the Mountbattens. We're doing chapter 20 today. So we are making our way through. We are well past the middle of the book, so we're making our way through. It has been 2 weeks since we've had an episode, and I'm so sorry about that, but vacation happens, summer happens, a lot of kids, things are going on. But just to remind you where we left off. So the last time we were together, Dickie is obviously no longer the Viceroy of India, but he is the Governor General, and that came with a plague of its own problems. There's all of these contentions. Of course, the dividing up of India amongst all of these different religious groups was becoming a major issue when they unveiled the plan to allot land to separate groups, and of course didn't go over well. And so everybody has been feeling this massive tension. There's fighting in the streets. Dickie's dealing with it from a sort of administrative position. Edwina is literally in the streets trying to quell rebellions, trying to handle outbursts. And we talked last episode about how dangerous we thought that was. That she was in the streets with, fighting Muslims and Hindus and trying to, by herself, a singular woman, step in and somehow handle it. So I raised a big question mark to that. How did she possibly think that was going to go well? But luckily for her, Nehru comes in, joins her, is fighting and defending her, and trying to help the rebellion. And so I don't know if it was his presence that saved her from a much worse fate, but I can only imagine what could have happened to her if she kept putting herself in those situations. And I have to say, I don't know if it was just her colossal ignorance or if it was a wish to flirt with danger, and more than just the typical, let's drive fast in a car kind of flirt with danger. I'm did she want something bad to happen to her? Because to go into a raging crowd of men who don't have the same care for women as maybe her Western culture has treated her with, to go into that crowd and be a woman that was trying to tell men what to do and to put down arms and to stop fighting, I just can't imagine that would have been taken very well. So I don't know what all that was about. But anyway, she's still alive. And in this chapter, which is called A Deeper Attachment, we're going to talk about that bond between her and Nehru. And it is a big whole thing. Now, it still remains unclear to me if this was a sexual relationship, but I can't imagine that it wasn't. Nehru's wife had died, so he is a widower, so he doesn't have to contend with keeping his wife out of it. Edwina's always done whatever came into her pretty little head. But I will say that the text is very descriptive of the respect they had for each other. So this appears to be, for Edwina, if it wasn't a sexual relationship, it's definitely the deepest connection she's ever had with another human being. So I wonder if maybe that's why it was so hard for her to walk away from Nehru, because, quite frankly, you can find sex with anybody. And I'm not demeaning or belittling the act. I think it's a very sacred thing. But I still think that you can go out into the world and you can find anybody who's willing to sleep with you. Everyone's just desperate. But it's a much different kind of connection to find somebody who sees the world the way you do and who wants to meet the world the way you want to meet it. So anyway, that's just my little spiel so that we can remember where we're at. And one other thing is you'll recall that Edwina is being very difficult in her personal relationships. Edwina seems to have a reserve of energy, passion, empathy, and kindness for the people out in the world. For her own people, she couldn't be bothered. You guys drive me crazy. And it continues to be her menopause that is to blame for this. I'm not undermining the power of some hormones. Believe me, I get it. But at the same time, it's like, could a person, like, at what point is a person going to be like, okay, I could be a bitch because I feel like it, but I'm going to choose not to be. Like, we can't just keep blaming the menopause. We get choices here. We do get to choose how we respond to life, whether we feel like it or not. But so chapter 20 begins with Ismay, and he's writing to his wife, and he has some choice words about Edwina. He said, she's been dreadfully tiresome lately. There have been daily scenes about Dickie's decision to go home for the wedding. Personally, I think it's advisable on every count. It's good for the government of India because it'll show them that they can do without him. It's good for Pakistan because it'll show them that he's not, as they charge, the supreme commander of the Kashmir offensive. And it's good for Dickie himself, as he badly needs a change. Now, what wedding is this that Ismay's writing to his wife about? Only the wedding between Princess Elizabeth and Philip. So it's a big wedding, and I think Ismay's right. Dickie needs to extricate himself from this situation. He's far too involved. He's getting fingers pointed at him over everything. I mean, of course he's involved. He has to be. But the sooner he can get out of there, the better. And if he has an excuse to get out of there for a legitimate reason, like a royal wedding, son, find the door. Get out of here. Now, the wedding on November 20th was that of Prince Philip and Princess Elizabeth, one which Mountbatten had long encouraged, and which Pamela was due to be bridesmaid. In August 1946, Philip had secretly proposed to Elizabeth at Balmoral, informing his uncle the next day. And in October, the king wrote in his diary, "Dickie came to lunch when we discussed everything." The following month, Dickie saw the Home Secretary and Prime Minister to finalize the naturalization papers and agree that henceforth Philip would be known as His Royal Highness Prince Philip, and arrange for the young naval officer to meet 3 Beaverbrook newspaper executives at the Mountbatten home so as to brief behind the scenes. Okay, well, that's great news for Philip. He's been working on this all these many years. Of course, Dickie likes to interfere, and he likes to feel like this new station in life is much due to him. But Philip, in this section, is really inviting Dickie to take a step back. Like, I got it, man. Thank you so much for your help. I really appreciate it, but, I actually can't handle my own business. In January 1947, it was Mountbatten who confirmed to the Home Secretary that his nephew would be taking his family's name on naturalization. Oldcastle had been considered but rejected as sounding too much like a brewery, but Mountbatten's interfering was beginning to irritate Philip, who felt he was perfectly capable of running his own life. He wrote, "I'm not being rude, but it is apparent that you like the idea of being general manager of this little show, and I am rather afraid that she, Elizabeth, might not take to the idea quite as docilely as I do. It is true that I know what is good for me, but don't forget that she has not had you as Uncle Loco Parentis, counselor and friend as long as I have." In March, the naturalization of Philip, who gave the Mountbattens home at 16 Chester Street as his address, was announced in the London Gazette, and in July 1947 the engagement was officially announced. One of those who had helped prepare the ground was a journalist and Labour MP Tom Dribberg, whom Mountbatten had first met at SEAC and had used as a useful sounding board in contact in both Parliament and the media. It was Dryburgh who, having talked to other Labour MPs, had advised that the wedding be kept low-key and that Philip's financial allowances be kept modest. It was a view that Mountbatten challenged. Mountbatten wrote and said, "You have either got to give up the monarchy or give the wretched people who have got to carry out the function of the crown enough money to be able to do it with the same dignity, at least as the Prime Minister or Lord Mayor of London is afforded." So, as you can see, it doesn't matter that Philip said, "Could you please butt out? I can actually handle this." No. Mountbatten enjoys far too much having his finger in all the little pies. So he's still going to sound off on how much money he thinks Philip needs to get, because he doesn't trust that Philip can go to bat for himself. On November 11th, the Mountbattens arrived back in London, and as the Broadbournes were using Chester Street, they took a suite at the Dorchester Hotel. Edwina was keen to see her first grandchild, Norton, who had been born a month earlier, attending the christening and Prepare Broadlands, which was hosting the first part of the royal honeymoon. She also wanted to see her old lover, Malcolm Sargent. Remember, he was that conductor that she had this weird little relationship with where they definitely weren't like a love match, but they were sort of a placeholder until either one of them found somebody better. He's dragged on in her life way too long because they don't really care about each other that much, but he's someone anyway. And then he stayed for one of their 2 nights at Broadlands while Dickie made himself scarce. This relationship will never make sense to me. Thanks for being so sweet and understanding during those days in England, Edwina wrote to her husband after their return. Can you imagine finally coming back to the home country and she, can't beat a path fast enough to find her old lover, and then she's like, hey, you're going to need to vacate our home because I'm having my guy over, so my boyfriend's going to be here, so you can't stay. Make yourself scarce. What the heck? Okay, well, behind the public appearance of affability, however, the tensions in the marriage continued with frequent quarrels, including one so bad between Edwina and Yola that the latter had offered to leave early. Edwina was resentful of the demands of her husband's job, his female friends, and his relationship with his daughters. Meanwhile, she literally just kicked him out of their home so that she could continue on with her boyfriend, but he's going to have to tone it down with his love life. Well, thank God he's got a love life so that he had a home to go to when she kicked him out of theirs. Anyway, as always, Peter Murphy was the peacemaker, writing to Edwina. Poor old Dickie's becoming so rattled. He's now in a state of feeling that he must try not to do silly things, which are habits and second nature to him. It distresses me so that you ever imagine that you're not a very great, deep love in his life. I've been his confidant off and on for 25 years. You know that. What it seems you don't know is the unfailing affection and loyalty that he feels for you, and that he's spoken of so freely to me. There has never been a moment in the past, Edwina, however difficult things may have appeared, and in circumstances when 99 men out of 100 would have felt they no longer had any responsibility, that Dickie didn't put your happiness first. I think if you look into your heart and honestly remember how good a friend he's been to you, you will realize that what I say is true. Well, I think the fact that you have a relationship where your friends have to continually sound off and enter into the fray and fight your little battles for you and be these little mediators, that is a messed up relationship. And also your friends, that is not their job to constantly be coming in and being like, okay, Dickie, okay, so those are your feelings. All right, well, I'll write to Edwina about that. Okay, Edwina, what are your feelings? Oh, okay, I'll try to figure out if I can. What? This isn't middle school where we're passing notes in the hallway because we're too cowardly to actually go and have a conversation. Dickie and Edwina should never have been married. That is the end of the story. And to constantly burden your friends to be these in-between men is ridiculous to the extreme. But it didn't matter what Peter said, the menopause strikes again. Whilst Dickie was able to relax with morning rides with Pamela and evenings on his genealogical relationship tables with its various codes for the interlocking branches of his family tree, Edwina remained tense. She suffered from insomnia, partly influenced by the menopause, which was only resolved by pills or playing Elgar's Enigma variations on the gramophone. I bet that became the soundtrack of chaos in their house. There was some relief in the new year when Malcolm Sargent came to stay en route to a music festival in Turkey, but he quickly developed dysentery, and Edwina saw little of him. But darling, do please take care of yourself. We do mind a lot what happens to you, all of us, she wrote to him. I've missed you so much. I hate not seeing you and not being able to consult you about things. You're very sweet and wise and human, and I value your opinion very much, as you know. What is this little sweet talk to old Malcolm? Malcolm means nothing to you. Why don't you dig in deep and try to figure something out with your husband? I mean, it's getting a little bit redundant, my commentary about their relationship, but at the same time, anybody with an outside perspective who has a chance to look at this would go, okay, well, they're ridiculous. And it's so clear what they should do. They should try with each other. But that does little because they're right in the middle of it and they can't see. They both feel sinned against, even though both of them gave the green light to the other to sin against them. And now that it's happened, they're like, how could you? I hate you because of it. I don't think I've ever seen two people so accomplished that's so emotionally immature. But transferring back to what's going on in India. The book goes on to say that one of those who had kept the communal peace was Gandhi, who had fasted until he felt communal violence had abated. At the end of January, as he made his way to a prayer meeting at his Delhi home, supported by his 2 young great nieces, a lone gunman fired at him, killing him instantly. Mountbatten rushed to the scene. As he got out of the car, someone in the crowd shouted out to him, "It was a Muslim who did it!" To which Mountbatten instinctively replied, "You fool, don't you know it was a Hindu?" The fact was that no one knew. If it was a Muslim, then civil war was inevitable. Well, that was quick thinking on his part. Inside the Birla house, Mountbatten found most of the cabinet almost incoherent with grief. Ever the opportunist, he seized the opportunity for good to come from evil. Beckoning Nehru and Patel, who had recently become estranged, he told them of Gandhi's wish that they should remain friends. The two men looked at each other and embraced in silence. Later that evening, they jointly broadcast to the new nation. The next day, a huge crowd, larger even than the one on Independence Day, followed Gandhi's body, placed on an army weapons carrier, in a procession of over 5,000 troops on the 9-mile route from Birla House to the Raj Gate, by the banks of the Jumna, where he was to be cremated. So large was the throng round the funeral pyre that it threatened to push the Mountbattens into the flames, until Dicky ordered everyone to sit down, and then quietly slipped away. Gandhi's death had not just brought the politicians together, but, not surprisingly, deepened the existing affection between the Mountbattens. Nehru had refused their invitation to live at Government House to ensure his personal safety, but he now saw even more of the couple, and in particular Edwina, who had written a comforting letter after Gandhi's death. She's really going to use this to get closer to Nehru. Now, here's my thoughts about this. I feel like, while Nehru definitely admired her and would have wanted, he wasn't opposed to this deepening friendship, I also think she definitely pushed it as well. Dicky had always had a picture of Nehru on his desk, and now Edwina had asked for one as well. "My dear Jalal, I would love to have one. In fact, two. I'd like a formal one, and if possible, an informal snapshot. Love ever, Edwina." Thanking him a few days later for the delightful snapshots and photograph, she offered to return the favor. "My admiration for you increases each day. I'd love you to have a photograph, and will send one as soon as I've found one you might like. Love ever, Edwina." Now, do we find this odd? Now, I know we live in a different generation, obviously, so people send pictures to each other all the time. So I'm not saying that the exchange of photographs is that strange. It's not weird, but he'd never offered it to her, but she's like, "I want a picture of you." Okay, fine. So he sends one. And then she's like, "And I have one for you." But he didn't ask for it, though. It just feels like she's trying to orchestrate this relationship and this little exchange of memorabilia, and trying to create, sort of drum up some affection. It just feels like she's trying to hasten some intimacy. For Nehru, amidst the loneliness of high public office, there was someone who he could trust and to whom he could confide. "I want someone to talk to me sanely and confidently, as you can do so well," he wrote to Edwina in April. To look to her for sanity is to say he really had no one. "For I am in danger of losing faith in myself and the work that I do. What has happened is happening to the values we cherished. Where are our brave ideals?" In mid-May, Nehru joined the Mountbattens at Edwina's invitation for a few days at the retreat at Mashoba, driving there from Ambala in an open-top sports car. "Although we have come to know him pretty well during the last 14 months, it was during these 3 days that we really succeeded in establishing strong personal bonds," Mountbatten wrote to George VI. Yeah, some of us stronger than others. Dicky worked on his family tree. Edwina and Nehru walked, talked, or read companionably with each other. There were picnics and after-dinner games of cards. After the pressures of the last few months, everyone could finally relax. "A perfect evening," Edwina wrote in her diary, and then after the others had gone to bed, "a fascinating heart-to-heart with J.N." Seeing the strong emotional bond between the two, Dicky and Pamela discreetly withdrew to give them time together. Can you imagine the dynamic of watching your mom with another guy and then saying to your dad, "Hey, Dad, we should probably leave so that they can, get closer together"? How did Pamela not grow up to be a little bit more screwed up? She seems like she grew up to have her head on straight, but perhaps it's because she wasn't all that often with her mother. I don't know. That's a really trashy dynamic. 6 weeks before her departure, Edwina had finally, according to her younger daughter, found the, quote, companionship and equality of spirit and intellect that she craved. On the morning Nehru had to leave, she rose at 6:30 to see him off, and almost immediately afterwards sent him a letter. "I hate seeing you drive away this morning. You've left me with a strange sense of peace and happiness. Perhaps I've brought you the same?" He had felt the same, writing in a letter that crossed with hers. "Life is a dreary business, and when a bright patch comes, it rather takes one's breath away." Well, these are so syrupy. A few years later, he was more open about the moment. He wrote, "Suddenly I realized, and perhaps you did also, that there was a deeper attachment between us, that some uncontrollable force of which I was only dimly aware drew us to one another. I was overwhelmed, and at the same time exhilarated by this new discovery. We talked more intimately, as if some veil had been removed, and we could look into each other's eyes without fear or embarrassment." Meanwhile, her husband sits in the next room, busily scribbling his family tree because he must envelop himself in some menial task so that he doesn't have to feel the pain of his wife's betrayal. Restless and difficult when apart, Edwina would become exhilarated at the thought of being together with the Indian leader. For Dickie, however, life was easier as his wife's newfound happiness released him from the relentless late-night recriminations. Well, that is true. If she's going to fight with you and fuss with you and bitch you all night long, more power to her if she wants to get a boyfriend who can listen to it. Pamela remembered how, quote, in recent months, whenever he had left his huge pile of paperwork to go up to say goodnight to her, my father would find himself subject to a long stream of accusations that he didn't understand. He was ignoring her. His behavior had been rude. He didn't care about her. He was sympathetic and apologized even though he did not understand what he had done wrong. These were the exhausted outpourings of a woman who always drove herself too hard and felt intellectually isolated. To my father's great relief, after our short stay in the mountains, these sessions ceased. Now when my father went up, he would find her studying her pocket atlas, and she would simply smile and wish him a cheery "Good night, Dickie darling," and he would then return to his work through most of the night without a heavy heart. So basically, she's just, having some fits because there's nobody in her life who's going to pay her all this attention and make her feel like her life is worth something because she doesn't have the ability to believe it herself. How many times have we seen this theme? People lashing out because they don't currently have somebody who is going to worship them and bow down to their intellect. So they lash out at everybody in their family. They're unkind to everybody. And then, as soon as they find that person who will be a sycophant, they're like, I'm good. Good night, Dickie darling. Sleep well. It's all just colossal self-interest. As long as she's got somebody who is going to make her feel like life is exciting, then she has a reserve of patience. If life is getting boring and she doesn't have somebody there at her feet telling her how wonderful she is, she lashes out in rage and indignation. And if I were Dickie, I cannot understand why he put up with it. Did he have that thing? Some people, they're like, if I don't have a fight going on, if there's not some drama, then I don't feel alive. Was he like that? Like, was he kind of addicted to the drama of his life? Because he got something out of it. People don't stay in emotionally difficult situations that are traumatic and emotionally shattering because they just love to be kicked around. Everything you do because there's some payout. Even if it's minute, there's something you're getting out of that. And I feel like Dickie must have felt sort of enlivened by these little cat fights that they would have. Not that he could have articulated that, but there must have been something that made him feel like there was still something between them, if she could still be angry at him, if he felt like she had, cast him to the side and that he was no longer of any importance to her, she wouldn't have been fighting with him. Now there's a reprieve that is nice, but I can guarantee you that if she had always and forever after been sort of like dismissive of him, but, happy with her boyfriends, but like never would engage with him anymore, I don't think he would have liked that either. On June 11th, Edwina and Nehru flew to the United Provinces to say goodbye to Sarojini, an old friend of Edwina's mother. They walked in the gardens, drifted on a boat in the lake, and next morning rode together in the mountains. This was the only promise we ever made, Edwina wrote to Nehru later, on the road to Nainital, that nothing we did or felt would ever be allowed to come between you and your work, or me and mine, because that would spoil everything. As the date of departure loomed, Nehru tried to convince her to stay and continue her work with refugees, but torn as she was, she knew her place was with her husband. It wouldn't look good if she left. And so it will be, and it has to be, he reflected. How wise and right you are, but wisdom brings little satisfaction. A feeling of acute malaise is creeping over me, and horror seizes me when I look at a picture in my mind of your shaking thousands of hands on the night of the 20th and saying your final goodbyes. Dickie and you cannot bypass your fate, just as I cannot bypass mine. People are really making life difficult by playing around in relationships they didn't need to. I'm not undermining the emotions that they feel for each other, even though they do have a tendency to describe themselves in very syrupy terms to one another. I understand that they have legitimate feelings for each other, but why step into this emotional turmoil that didn't have to be your part? Why make life hurt so badly? And that's why so many of the books we've read, I ask myself, why are you making life hurt? You're making the pain. You're creating it. You're wallowing in it. You are crying because of it. Yet you were the author and illustrator of the entire scenario. And that's where my sympathy ends. If you were in pain because of something that you had not created, I sympathize with you to the extreme. But when you're like, it's so hard for me to think of you leaving, I just don't know how this could be. I know you have to, but I hate it, You wouldn't feel this way if you hadn't found yourself entangled with her on a level that you had no business being entangled with her. The book goes on to say that they dined with Nehru and his family, and Edwina noted in a diary that they sat in a garden with a full moon, sadder and sadder. Finally, the last night came. After a farewell party for all 2,000 staff, the cabinet hosted a state banquet in Government House, where the Mountbattens were presented with a huge silver tray inscribed with the names of the Indian cabinet, the governors of the provinces, and president of Constituent Assembly. In return, they donated the Viceroy's gold plate service. Nehru began by paying tribute to Dicky. He said, "It is difficult for me or anyone to judge what we have done during the last year or so. We are too near to it and too intimately connected with events. Maybe we have made many mistakes, you and we. Historians, a generation or two hence, will perhaps be able to judge what we have done right and what we have done wrong." He continued that he believed, quote, "We did try to do right, and I am convinced that you tried to do the right thing by India, and thereby many of our sins will be forgiven us, and many of our errors also." And then he turned to Edwina, who had been in tears. And he said, "To you, madam, the gods or some good fairy gave beauty and high intelligence and grace and charm and vitality, great gifts, and she who possesses them is a great lady wherever she goes. But unto those that have, even more shall be given, and they gave you something which was even rarer than those gifts, the human touch, the love of humanity, the urge to serve those who suffer and who are in distress. And this amazing mixture of qualities results in a radiant personality and in the healer's touch. Wherever you have gone, you have brought solace, you have brought hope and encouragement." Wherever you've gone, yeah, so long as it's not in the four walls of your own home. Early the next morning, Nehru appeared at the government house where he and Edwina exchanged presents. For him, one of her most valued possessions, an 18th century French pot of enamel and gold, and for her, an ancient coin, a box of ripe mangoes, and a copy of his autobiography. Interesting. Then the Mountbattens left Government House for the last time, a bodyguard lining the steps and escorting the carriage. As they were about to move off, one of the horses jibed. "Even the horses won't let you go," someone called out. Away from the crowds on board the plane, Edwina finally broke down in tears. Taking off something around her neck, she passed it to her personal assistant, motioning to her to leave the plane. It was her precious St. Christopher that she wanted Nehru to have. The long flight home passed in somber silence. And that's the end of that. Next chapter is called Malta again, so we'll reconvene next Sunday to discuss what that's about. I'm losing patience with these people, to say the least. Their wild lifestyle is losing its interesting edge. The tears, the sugary letters describing to each other their relationship as though it's news to both of them. I just feel like I don't care. But I am pressing forward because I really want to find more about Dicky. How many times have I read in the comments people being like, you just wait till you get later on in this book. Dicky was a character. I also don't know anything about his assassination at the end of his life. So we're pressing on because I'm really interested in that. But I can tell you right now, I am over it with Edwina. I've been over it with her for quite a minute. And, she's an interesting person. We'll see what becomes of her by the end of the book. But I just find, I loathe her. I loathe her entirely because I really dislike when people can be such influential individuals out in the world and they have this public persona, but that they cannot extend that same kindness to their family. I don't have time for that. It really bothers me. The hypocrisy of it is so hateful. I think it was Maya Angelou who said, if you have only one smile, give it to those in your family. I'm paraphrasing, but I really believe that. Don't save that for the outside world, the people who don't even know you. Don't be such a fraud. Don't be a fraud. It's like treat the people in your own house you have to be with all the time with grace and dignity and respect. Preferably, you'd be like that with everybody, whether they're in your house or not. But if you only have one smile to give it to the people who know you and who have put in the time with you. And don't waste it in the outside world just so you can get a bunch of accolades. Because you know what? In the end, they're false anyway. That beautiful thing that Nehru said to her about her probably rang really false and hollow in the ears of Edwina's husband and daughters. And those are the people whose opinion should really count. I want my husband and my kids to, if I receive any praise, not to secretly think, oh, well, they don't know the real story. They don't know the real cheer. You know, how embarrassing would that be? And you could never really accept the praise because you know that it was all fraudulent and fake. Anyway, we'll see what next chapter brings. Now, if you were with us during the Housekeeper's Diary, this one is over, so we are done with this book, but the Kennedy book has come out. We did the first episode, and we're working our way through the stories about Carolyn Bessette. That is John Kennedy Jr.'s wife, and what she experienced with John Kennedy. That was a really interesting episode that I dropped earlier this week. So if you would like a new set of stories, if you are ready for some American drama, we got American drama for you. All right, I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.